Welcome to a new episode of Open Internet Pods. Today we have a very special guest from ApeBond. It's Boba for the first time in person. How's it going, Boba? Everything good?
Well, thank you guys for having me. Yeah, you could just call me Boba. I'm a senior business developer at ApeBond, and yeah, happy to talk to you guys today. And excited, obviously we've been partnered for a while now, so it's great to get on and chat a bit about our partnership and a little bit about us.
As always, we have Richard with us, manager extraordinaire of the Sato project.
That's fun. I've been doing a bit of dev today. Been working on some cool stuff we might talk about later, but yeah, it's I wear a lot of hats.
First and foremost, let's talk about the bond, right? The bond is sold out. Are you guys surprised? Is this how usually it works? Because compared to the first bond, this one kind of like went off the shelf in like 2 seconds. I'm asking Bob.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. Honestly, not surprised, because good quality, quality always wins out, and then obviously Saito is at the upper echelon of that. So yeah, not surprised, honestly. First bonds kind of tend to take a little bit of a while because our community is kind of getting used to you guys are getting used to us. So there's always kind of this testing phase. But from the second, third, I don't know, 10th, we've seen other projects do really, really well, and obviously everybody loves it. The opportunity to get good quality tokens is few and far between these days, and so community loves it, and all the stuff we do around it, people really respond to it. But 8 days is kind of cool, especially in this market. Really, really good performance, and really happy with it.
Yeah, definitely. What do you feel, Richard?
Well, I mean, for us, it was, the first one was very much an experiment, sort of where anyone who knows us as a project knows we're very, very cautious about these kind of things. I think there's a lot of talk about tokenomics and stuff from projects, and usually the more you hear about that, the more you kind of want to worry. I feel like it's something, if that's the preeminent concern of the project, it's not the right thing to be looking at, right? Not the right thing for founders or senior people to be like really concerned about, in the sense that that there needs to be more to a project than that. Having said that, we're very, very cautious about any use of tokens for fundraising or whatever, even if they're ones that we've gotten, say, from liquidity earnings in the past. And so it's been really good to find a method of engaging with a public group, and making a kind of offer for them, and then to get the response too. Because anytime, if you've worked like I have on something like Saito, anytime you get interest in the project, you start meeting new people, and you see people appreciating the project for what it is and starting to understand it, engage with it, then that's obviously a really positive experience. So that's been a lot of what's been really cool about it is, like the numeric version is being able to look at the number of holders, right, and say, okay, that's gone up. Good. There's now more people involved with the project. But it's also the kind of collateral for that, people coming along, and we've seen an uptake of people come in saying hi on Red Square, the social platform, or via Telegram, whatever, looking us up, obviously looking into the project. So it's not just that the financial goal was achieved, it's also that there's that kind of strong interest. So it kind of tweaks my interest in it, like how can we extend that? Because obviously, we don't only want to be doing that while we're selling tokens. We'd love to be getting in front of people, whatever. But really, really pleasing to see it go and go that quickly. Like, obviously we'd planned this to be mid-bond, and we've planned other outreach and things around it, and that's already kind of going to be in the past tense when we get there. But that's cool. It's really 8 days really surprised me.
Yeah. Speaking of people, sorry, go ahead, Boba.
No, I wanted to say, just lovely response. I loved it to just sit back and look at it every single day.
Yeah.
It was very funny. A lot of the people that showed up in the Telegram were like, "Oh man, it's already sold out. I was gonna go. I was just looking for my wallet. By the time I found it, it's like the bond was sold out." Yeah, sorry guys.
Yeah.
Man, I
wouldn't.
missed it.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. We had a lot of that as well. But again, people's interests are piqued, and I'm glad that kind of there's this community overlap as well. That's our whole intention with it. That it's really community driven as well, and so I'm so super glad that there's been a spike in holders and interests.
Yeah, I'm now just annoyed that I missed my shot at using that Dave Chappelle meme, the one where he's got the white powder.
You got any more Satos?
You got any more of that ApeBond site?
Yeah. But speaking of crowdfunding, right? How did that idea come about?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We didn't initially set out to achieve this. So our initial thing that we set out to achieve is liquidity, because a bonding curve, that's what the bond refers to, is just a bonding curve, is now made famous by Pump.fun and all these launch pads. But we used it initially as a way to build liquidity that is protocol owned. So what does that mean? It's actually just you would offer incentives, the same as what you would do with a farm. You would put up token incentives, people would provide liquidity, but then at the end of it, that liquidity's ownership is transferred to the protocol, and the user or the person providing the liquidity got rewards out of it, right? We know from a farm and how it runs these days is, the user earns reward but keeps the liquidity as well. And so we felt like that's not that great for a protocol, because their liquidity isn't as sticky. They can't kind of build to escape velocity in their liquidity pool. And so initially it all came from that concept as, how do we help a protocol become majority owners of their liquidity? And so the bonding curves was an ideal solution to this. And we built that completely. And then all of a sudden people asked us, well, could we use this to find new community members, but then also raise that capital to spend it on listings or to spend it on development expenses? And we looked at it objectively and felt like that's a pretty good way to support and help a project along their way. And so let's offer that as well. And that's kind of how this came about. Initially just liquidity focused, but then now it's kind of became these smart little raises that essentially is the lifeblood of any project and kind of gets them to where they want to go. But then also, the counterparty, the person holding that token becomes a part of your community. And that is great as well, because then there's more attention and there's more people talking about you. So that helps, just with price action and tokenomics and all these things. But yeah, I digress. It basically was for liquidity, and people asked for us to change it in this way.
That's super interesting, because it's kind of like demand driven, right? Because the idea of crowdfunding with crypto is not a crazy one, like building a GoFundMe, but just making it use something else is not, something that's not dollars or whatever. It is not a far-fetched idea, but it's really interesting that the kind of primary place where your product ended up was a form of kind of it's very much like a Kickstarter type scenario in the end, where people can come in and support something and get some involvement and ownership of the project essentially while they're doing that, or some stake in the project. So it's kind of very interesting to me that that's kind of not what you set out to achieve, but that you kind of got there in the end.
Yeah, we got there. And yeah, like I said, it's just via partners, right? Normal people are saying like, this is what we need. And so we adapted and built and eventually moved away, because I probably need to mention this as well. We were a DEX back in 2021 when we started. We were called ApeSwap. And so obviously for a DEX, the lifeblood is liquidity as well. And your partners talk about liquidity every single day. But then it became a thing of, how can we fundraise with this, right? And so that's kind of when we led into what we are now, which is ApeBond, because this thing became our primary product. People weren't so interested. Liquidity pools aren't sexy, so people were more interested in kind of how can we help them with
Funding
this.
curves are not like the funding curves aren't the kind of thing that get people excited either.
No, it isn't.
That's really cool because I think it's also indicative. I mean, one thing I've been around in the space for a long time, and I've gotten very used to very rigid mentalities. Funnily enough, we're supposed to be in this. The Web3 space is supposed to be about disruption and rethinking things and rebuilding industries, reimagining stuff, and yet so often there's very, very rigid thinking, and I think often that's just because there's a very simple and not very well developed business model behind things, and so people can't really do anything else. They're essentially a smart contract, that is their business or whatever. But it's been a really interesting thing working with you guys because I kind of hadn't anticipated it. I'm used to making suggestions about different ways to do things and hitting a wall. And with you guys, it's been a fairly constant. Like, oh yeah, no, that we could talk about that, or that seems interesting. And that's kind of seems like a bit of a hallmark of our dealings with you. Anyway, it's sort of an interesting flexibility you guys seem to have.
Yeah, and we try and be as supportive as possible because ultimately, we feel like if our partners don't achieve success, we're ultimately also not successful, right? Like we've seen through this last year or so, year and a half, so many projects, well-known projects, just close shop. And that's terrible to see, but that's just the reality of it. If there's no support or sound decisions, projects unfortunately need to move on.
Well, I think that's maybe also something people aren't really aware of, and it's kind of what options you have in from the project side, right? Because there are quote unquote VCs. There are some real ones, but for the most part, the space is full of people trying to turn a quick dollar. And so, there are kind of OTC deals are the current thing. There's various trends, but the OTC deals tend to come with like a really heavy discount to the buyer and almost immediate liquidity, so they can just sell if they want to. But then also often a series of required or semi-required other services that then basically go to partner companies of the VC. So they're getting the tokens at an extreme discount. And I don't think people necessarily realize there are very few ways of operating in the space that don't take you straight into the hands of either those kind of VCs or exchanges who then have a very, very simple game of flipping on retail. And it's not often very clear to people that, how that works. And so I think one of the things that was really appealing here was that ability to do something in a much more open way and dealing much more directly with community rather than they're new, but crypto institutions.
Yeah. No, 100%.
That's a great insight. But speaking of going direct to consumer or direct to community, I can see like the shift from a swap to a bond because it's in a way the sale is a bit more difficult now. So you kind of have to like get to know the project, understand why people are a bit more careful with their liquidity, right? In 2021, everybody was cash rich, just throwing out money. But I'm asking because I really like this idea of ape to earn. I'm just wondering where that came from.
Yeah, I'm glad I kind of touched this point so we could touch in the call this point. But yeah, no, it's actually a lovely story. So we had one of our former community members kind of reach out and then be the pioneer of Ape to Earn, and he eventually became a part of our team. And I just feel like that again kind of displays the strength in community and numbers, and people that really want to contribute. They rise to the surface, right? You always see them in the public forums. You see them, giving good suggestions of where to kind of move with it next. And so, yeah, it came from a need for us to be more involved in a deeper way with the partners, and make sure that, if there's any content being made by anyone, it's good quality content. I guess it's a lot to do with kind of the restrictions of Twitter as well. You want to make sure that if you're rewarding anything, it's rewarding a good action, and so again, we built it to be a completely, uh, community / adjacent. Anybody could get involved. You just create a profile, and you can see the projects that we work with and get involved with them as well, ask questions, and then post about that and get a small reward for doing so. And then, yeah, tying that back into the bond was super helpful, right? Because, ultimately, the more people see the bond, the quicker, we can get that GoFundMe, for lack of a better word, raised. And so, yeah, those two things for us just went hand in hand, and we felt like, this is a great thing to empower this person with, and to give him the resources to build it. And honestly, it's been a super success for us. And, now we're kind of bearing the fruits of that labor, and kind of trusting someone, and giving them the resources to prove us right,
Yeah. I like that from the aspect of, again, it's that, the thing that makes my ears prick up there, me being me, is the anyone can join thing, right? And again, people who aren't familiar with what the kind of space is generally like, you have these kind of KOLs who own that space, and 2021 or 2017, it was all about getting those kind of people on board to get your message out, and some really surprising deals have been done in history. And sort of always wanting to avoid that kind of thing as much as possible, or work with as reputable people as possible. I just really like this idea of not just opening up the fundraising to be public, rather than kind of only going to institutions, but then also not playing into the same thing with, oh, well, okay, we went to the public, but then we had to go and use some like crypto OGs to shill things or whatever, be able to go out and say, if you can participate, and again, it's a very side thing, if you can do some work that generates something of value for someone, then if you've got a nice system for rewarding that, that's a far better, throw that open and let people participate, is a far better option than, sort of going to the
and I think that links to your point, right? Like, I think a lot of general crypto people don't really know that these things are happening, behind closed doors. These KOLs gets paid off somehow, to do what they do. So, I mean, I think people are a lot more aware now than they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but I just think it's not fair. And, it's not, just crypto was was built to be open rails.
Well,
and now we've kind of,
it's not just crypto. So like the YouTuber scene is being invaded by private equity now. So private equity's worked out they can go and buy your cooking channel or your tech tips channel, or whatever it is, and then wring money out of it. Basically, they can, they've got production teams, etc., so they can like flip much more content out via you, etc., and just wring the money out of the channel. In terms of the overall benefit to the creator, perhaps this is not bad for them to like be able to retire and turn sell the business they built. But in terms of what actually ends up happening for end users, is that everything just enshittifies, right? And crypto being the kind of open-ended space that it is, I think a lot of those things just happen on steroids, right? So they just happen faster. And so you had that kind of precursor to that, what's now happening with influencers on, on various social platforms being, bought and paid for, was sort of just, ahead of its time in crypto. But I think a lot of people haven't been aware of just how much that happens in either sphere. And, it's there's a kind of thirst for independent or different information, but not necessarily an ability to actually go and check that it really is independent. And what's happening is the people who built and funded newsrooms to sell their own agenda have worked out they can also buy YouTube channels and Twitter KOLs to do the same thing if that's the better way to run the business. So it's nice to have options where you can be, free from that. And it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah. You're spot on, and I'm sad for us, not as a space, but I'm more sad for that first person that gets to that YouTube channel and kind of doesn't know the lay of the land, doesn't understand that what they get told is probably influenced somehow, by payment, So yeah, that's what saddens me.
You know what they say? It's not about timing the market; it's about time in the market. So we all go through that rite of passage, right? One way or another.
Funny, yeah.
Nobody gets away from that. I'm just curious. Speaking of Ape to Earn, would that Ape to Earn model could you expand that beyond interaction with the bond? Like, for example, to incentivize a community to just push their project. Maybe they bought the bond and they just want to interact with the project more, but kind of managing that relationship.
Oh, 100%, 100%. So we wanted to build it the right way from the ground up. So again, not just most of the rewards going to these big accounts that kind of just you give it to them because they're big, which often happens at on all of these other sites that we know. So again, we built it with a specific purpose, but like we've done most things as ApeBond, if it leads us in that direction, we kind of always do trial and error. And so if it leads us in that direction where it becomes something that's alone standing and, could stand on its own 2 feet, 100%, we'll move in that direction. But as of now, yes, it could be used just as a community tool, engage more people. Obviously, our communities differ vastly, and it's great, both our protocols has been around since forever. So it's great to kind of have that mixture happening between these protocols and the community members. And so right now, that is easy to do with Ape to Earn and something we intend to do. And we're doing, I think quite well right now.
Yeah, because I think that's kind of like the trend now. I think that there's like people are moving into this idea of community, getting to know, and like really like building grassroots. While before you were just like pulling out your wallet and doing your own research and like kind of making bets. Now it's more of a group activity, and people are like collectively deciding what they want to join in and how they want to interact, which I think is it's a much healthier way. And I think I think we all learned some lessons from 2021. So it's we speed run an entire economic cycle within like 2-3 years, right? They're around 2020, 2021. What usually takes 13 years in the real economy, we did it in 2 years. So there was a lot of lessons learned there. Speaking of that, what's the one thing that you saw in your community that surprised you? Because just keep talking about community.
Yeah, it's honestly, I would say it's that people still contribute, right? Like you would think if the market is kind of sideways, people would go away and not come back and want to speak and interact and give their opinions. I would say our community is super resilient. They've been with us through the Ape Swap days, they saw our growth into ApeBond, and now they kind of see the direction we're heading, because we did some tokenomics overhauls. We did a lot of things to make it clear, simple, easily digestible, but then also not alienate anybody that has been with us since the ApeSwap days. And so I feel like, that's been surprising to me, because I've seen, and maybe it's because of all the people that launched in 2021. Those people kind of stuck together in their communities. But I've seen a lot of communities fall apart just because of this bear market, and people understanding or not being able to sustain or keep their community engaged, So I would say resilience. And then as well, like, from the community, we have a lot of developers who are working at ApeBond right now that used to be just community members, right? Like they worked themselves into a position where they were valuable to the organization, and so they were brought in. So I would say that's something really cool that we have, that I think a lot of projects do have, but I would say something unique to us, that we have multiple people that went through this kind of path, and their talent and just tenacity was seen, and they were kind of brought into the organization and did really, really well for us. So yeah, I would say those two things is what stands out to me.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's amazing to hear, because that's basically what you want. This is what you're looking for. You're looking people who are so engaged that they eventually end up being part of the team, and it's literally every founder's dream to to have that pathway, to say, to point at his core team and say, like, yeah, these are my guys. These were they were writing in the chat, they were writing in the forums, and now they're part of the team. So that's definitely the way to go, and it's great to see people actually doing it, not just saying, oh, can devs fix price or something like that. That was a
Well,
classic.
I think there's
Yeah.
been a general maturing. So you're saying, you kind of, before I actually think this is a kind of better model. I think there has been a lot of maturing. So they're at the kind of peak of the nonsense, don't know how to put things, but there was a huge culture of standing around and expecting sort of participation fees, like you're an extra. And it was when I kind of first thought of that example, I'm like, oh wait, that actually makes sense, because they're an extra in a show. It's not an actual industry or business in these cases. They're just there to give credibility to what's going on, to be a kind of stand around community. And I think a lot of that's shaken out, and what you're seeing now is people trying to seriously build things, and those communities are much more involved, much more made up of people who share the vision, share the mission, want to actually try and achieve it, and then have an attitude of needing to contribute, so that they are around to help, and maybe in a place to begin working on something with the project, and that can go from there, because they're kind of aligned, which is very different to kind of the kind of handout or the devs do something mentality that we had in the kind of peak 21, where people were just sort of like, and at that time too, everything was a DeFi project that was thought up in the last 6 weeks, right? So people had these sort of expectations that projects would go from nothing to sort of the peak of their powers in 4 weeks or something. But yeah, you look at most of what was created or listed then, and it's powder now. So
yeah, and we went through it, right? Like you guys as well. There's probably so many partners you can mention, or people that you were connected with that just kind of moved on to something else, or it runs a completely different protocol.
Yes, the StackOS guys who were doing cloud provisioning paid for with crypto anonymous, and I really liked that, because they were a kind of an adjunct to the ENS system or that kind of thing, to provide kind of. I ran a web server on their architecture, right? It wasn't specifically to run crypto nodes. You could, but I quite liked what they were doing, but they just couldn't. They never quite got product market fit. There's a couple of things. There was the Phantom, I think, protocol they were on at the time, or whatever, got got massively hacked and they lost, reserves in that, and a bunch of stuff happened. But they were really good guys with a really clear idea of what they wanted to achieve, and they worked really hard on it. And I contributed to, like, they did not just a rebranding, but they fully reworked their product offering with input from, they kind of went about it really professionally. They got people who'd use their stuff, really did everything, and they just didn't make it. And you see a lot of things as well that were kind of like a 3-week meme. They just disappeared. Hat rack with coat and dog just came and went.
Yeah. No, and it's sad because we had a partner called Dap Radar. I don't know if you guys know them, but they basically they listed just dApps or crypto projects essentially, and kind of have the right links, and shows you like a profile of what that project does, and kind of takes you through the journey. And they were one of those infrastructure things that people used to use, right? Like Dex Screener is now. But yeah, just unfortunately for them, they just closed shop and kind of went away.
Yeah, it's sad too, because most of the people who did that were the non-extractive, trying to build a real thing types, and not the other types. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a sad tale when you've got a few of those friendly ones in your past.
Yeah, well, speaking of community, we have 160 people watching us. So, say hello to everybody. Thank you guys for everything that you do. Hopefully,
you can tell I've
something.
got one small child left.
Yeah.
Wave like you're waving to a 5-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
But speaking, going a bit further down that path, I'm just curious. Do you guys look at your community and think like, what kind of people do we have in here? Like what age groups, and do you notice one part of the world being more active than another, or any insight into how that looks like? Because I feel like once you're online, it's you first and foremost, you have your own culture, the online culture, and then you have the Web3 blockchain culture, which is a subculture of that. And then within that subculture, you can have all these different tribes, and you don't know exactly who's who and where they come from. Do you guys have any insight into that?
I mean, yes, throughout the years, we kind of got into certain faces and places. So we have a lot of people actually awake, all through your waking hours, and then obviously later as well. But no, we have all the traditional, spots where crypto is strong, which, places like Southeast Asia, India, Europe is kind of big for us as well. And there's a lot of original apes out of Europe. And then South America is a big one for us. We had one co-founder initially on ApeSwap that was South American, and kind of, people really resonated with it. And, we were silly back then. I think a lot of projects took themselves, it was kind of at that anti-Euro stage where, there was a lot of crypto projects launching, but then projects like PancakeSwap came out. PancakeSwap, is this a financial instrument company? That's crazy, and so we kind of played with the apes on that front, and kept the ape because, we call our community the apes, and so we
I was wondering about the origin of that, because, I mean, obviously you're African, but is it you're the first ape I met in that sense.
Yeah. No, it was more so aping. Back in the day, people would say they didn't do any research. No, do your own research. Yeah. You would just ape into stuff. And so the original founders felt like,
what could go wrong?
Yeah, what could go wrong, especially in 2021.
The funny thing with that circle is, I think ape to earn is a kind of play on that, and it's kind of a funny one. I like it there. So it's not accidental. So, okay.
We still have that fun vibe. We try to kind of walk that balance rope between, just being playful and professional. But yeah, no, so initially it was aping. And so the original founders felt like Ape Swap was such a good name because, there's a lot of new projects on there. And so if you decide to invest in one, it's like aping and hoping essentially that it'll do well. And then our token back then was called Banana. So it was this whole theme of, we have bananas as a token and Ape Swap. And I think it was more so on that play that I mentioned with Pancake Swap and people not taking themselves too seriously, but doing something serious. And yeah, that's why we kept the ape, and we'll probably forever keep the ape. Yeah, that's why when we moved to bonds exclusively, we just called it ApeBond, and Ape to Earn is just, you're also aping. I think that's kind of the ethos of it. You're putting yourself out there because a lot of these content creators are new, but they're, deep community members of ours, but they are putting themselves out there because it's something they haven't done before. And then obviously the new people joining as people that have created content before and they're a little bit more well versed. But we're trying to open up the platform and make sure that anybody, doesn't matter who you are, you can learn to create a profile. Talk about something you care about. If you don't, then don't talk about it. And then also, invest some time into getting to know new projects and, new directives, and so that's kind of the ethos of it,
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, as a project that have a budget varyingly for we've always called it outreach rather than marketing because we're just trying to connect with people and grow a community.
Exactly.
The issue for us hasn't been it's largely been all about like where can we actually engage with people we want to be engaging with. So we've never done paid placement type stuff. We have worked with KOLs like we were mentioning before, but we had very strict rules that they had to, the way the agreements could be structured and that it had to be participating in the project, etc. And it's always been very hard to find things that weren't just either extortion, like the industry publications that just charged 25,000-30,000 to write a glowing piece about you or put you on the front cover of above the fold, whatever it is. So being able to find somewhere where you can say, well, this is a place where you can spend some marketing budget, and again, it's very open in that it doesn't have to be a lot, but you can actually be engaging with people who can go and take that work on and do something with it. Is quite an interesting difference, and I really like that openness of it. Like, it's possible people could turn it into a career if they're very good at it and they put the work in.
Yeah,
and that's kind of cool.
Like,
it's not.
Yeah, and there's content creators out there that I still follow, that I followed in 2021 because I knew that they weren't sellouts, right? Like once you've watched like one too many YouTube channels and you've figured out like the name of the game is pump the token I mention and then dump my supply that I got for free. Once you kind of learn, like maybe that's the rite of passage that Alex talked about. I still hope that nobody goes through it because it's terrible and it's
the market
not great,
has matured. I don't think.
Yes,
I don't think we have that sort of behavior anymore.
Yeah, and honestly, the content creators that I value the most is the ones that have some morals. They decide like, listen, if I do partner with something, I either put my own dollars down. If I talk about something, I kind of am invested in that community and bought, token, or they just, talk about trading. They keep it neutral, and they don't accept these deals where somebody could get hurt. But like Alex said, I do believe that's way lower now than it was in 2021. Back then, it was rampant.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that I think it's also a question of, I think people either understood or they're in the process of understanding that if you don't go out there and do your own communication, someone else will communicate on your behalf. Someone else will dictate the narratives, there's this shift that's happening where before there used to be that the typical startup would be tech guy, business guy. And now it's like tech guy, content guy, because distribution is so tied to content that it's literally just taking over because people are consuming. I think I read somewhere that there's like a 3 to 5x discrepancy between the amount of content available and the consumption. That's why you see repeated reels on Instagram, or you see the same videos being suggested on YouTube and so on, because there's so much demand, but the content available is just 3 to 5 times less than what people are asking for. So that sort of thing, I think that also ties in together with Ape to Earn, because it's just this desire to learn, to understand. And I think that especially in the newer generations, they kind of understand that you kind of have to build up your own world, because the one that came before, somebody else owns that. And the whole point of crypto was to get away from under that foot.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of interesting because, like, the first time I saw this kind of behavior, and it really surprised me, was the early days of the internet in China and people looking for reviews. And so everything that grew initially was review-based because people trusted nothing. They remembered the days of the news being entirely fictitious and all of those kinds of things. But the one thing that they'd actually pay some attention to was, reviews of, fellow netizen, as they called themselves, actually telling you about the restaurant or the shoes or whatever it was, which is really interesting because that died there because of the ability to spam it. The parties that ran those sites worked out there was a huge amount of money to be made by turning a blind eye to people building bot farms. Those classic photos of those factories in southern China full of phones connected up to chargers and a hub, and they're like doing 4,000 each operator is running 4,000 accounts at once, building clicks and or doing hit jobs on a restaurant, right? And I know people in the food and beverage field in China who've been hit by that. And it's kind of cool to see these kind of proofed things, right? These things where there's community-based ability to give, to provide information in a trustworthy way that's not tied, specifically to platforms and so forth. I think it's kind of refreshing.
If I can just jump in real fast, what you said about bombing a restaurant. I've read the other day about this very known Dutch builder guy, Levels.io. I don't know if you guys know him. He was writing about his girlfriend who wanted to leave a review on a restaurant, like a 3-star review, and the restaurant like DMCA'd or like attacked that review on copyright claims or something like that. And now she's banned from leaving Google reviews. And I think like once you understand that most of the interests, most of the interests are just like business to business, and you are just some sort of like node, not even node, like a drone is more the right word, that is just like being bounced around. For like, I need you to do this review. I need you to do this for me. But if you really want to say something like, you know what, that's not what we're looking for, banned. And I think that people are kind of waking up to that stuff, like who's really in charge here.
Yeah, well, I think it's also just a clear sign that the system is badly architected when you've got these weird attack vectors, right? Like, you don't go on to Google reviews and say this person lied and here's evidence, and I want this to be retracted because it's unfair to me. You DMCA them. So you make a spurious claim, but you hit them with the thing that's going to be, and it's a clear system that the system is just badly designed, right? And
no. I think the system is perfectly designed. It's just not designed for us.
Exactly.
The system is working as intended. It's perfect. That's the role of the system, is to just manage opinions and just make sure that only the accepted narrative comes through. And I've read about, I don't know, maybe you guys saw this on Twitter the other day. There was this guy who posted a pic on Twitter of his internet speed and tagged the Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, and said like, "Come on, dude, what's up with this? You know, like this is horrible." and then the police came after him, and he
Man.
had to take that down. And he was showing the letter that he got from the police for hate speech. So yeah,
That's
it's
hate
Germany
speech.
is a special case. It's a special type of, crazy.
I mean,
Yeah,
if that's hate
that's,
speech, I don't know what hate speech is. Need to go re-educate myself.
We've got camps for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's
It's
too soon.
too soon, too relevant. No, it's
Yeah.
well, not unfortunately. Fortunately, my internet speed is fine right now, so I'm not engaging in any hate speech. So although the process of changing ISPs caused a certain amount by this measure.
But speaking, speaking of that, because I feel like from my experience, like Southeast Asia has a different relationship with privacy, especially online, while Europe has a different type of relationship. They're more worried about it. And I'm just thinking, considering they have like different cultural ideas around privacy, why do you think that they're both so into the blockchain space and crypto? Is it like out of an economical thing, or are they just ideologically aligned? I don't know, I'm just trying to figure that out, and I was curious what you guys think.
I'll let you go first, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I've learned living in Asia for non-trivial amounts of time is one of the wisest things that someone said to me is just because people aren't saying something doesn't mean they aren't thinking it. And I think one of the things is Europeans and North Americans, the Anglosphere, we have this tradition of banging on about, my home is my castle and our rights and da-da-da-da. And so we're possibly more vocal than we actually care, because if you look at the people who are doing that, myself included at times, then you're like, we are signing up to Google and handing over this and doing that and giving away our privacy left, right, and center, despite protesting all the time about it. Whereas, you look at other cultures and maybe people are not making a big deal about it, but they're doing what they can to use, astroturfed accounts, or they're being thoughtful about accidentally misentering. A lot of Chinese people I know the checksum method for ID cards, so they know the way you can make an error that will come up as a valid number, which is a nice little way of then, if you get caught, you're like, oh, I just I keyed 6-9 instead of 7-3, sorry, but it happens to like validate, and that kind of thing. And so people who aren't talking about it aren't necessarily differently involved, and I think maybe in some cases they're actually more thoughtful about it, but in a very different way. And I think it's so that's part of my thought on this, and I think it's the same with, like, you look at I was looking at this boomers versus Gen Z when it comes to internet privacy. The boomers are all worried and falling for this protect the children nonsense. The children just lie. They understand the internet, right? Like they, have 3 or 4 personas that are like a 47-year-old businessman from Kent or whatever that they just make up and they use. So they remember them, but they know they're not being stalked or groomed or whatever because they're running a false persona, right? That's a solid OPSEC method in certain scenarios, right? They've got their way of doing it and they've thought it through. It would be better if they didn't need to at all, but actually, doing stuff privately or pseudonymously or whatever is not a bad thing. Like, it's great to have a personality that isn't, your own for certain public purposes. And so I think, sometimes, there's a sense that we're the ones who know about this. That people wrote books about freedom and we live by that and stuff. But actually, are people actually paying that much attention or actually really living it compared to people who've lived in places with a very recent history of whatever kind of autocracy or control, etc. Or just different modes. So yeah, I'm not sure it's
Yeah.
always as obvious.
And I feel like right now is kind of a key moment in the world where people trust their governments less and less, you know? Like it almost feels to me across the board, people that I speak to is less trusting. And I think that that lower amount of trust, even if you say it or you don't say it, if you protest it or you don't, I think everybody kind of feels a bit of that, you know? And I feel like what crypto kind of allows people to do is be outside of that system, you know, for just a brief moment in time, you know, and feel like they can take more control themselves, you know. So I feel like that control mechanism all humans wanted, right? You want control over your life or feel that you are controlling your life. So I feel like from majority of people that I speak with, you know, and then obviously there's other things like, you know, people do consider it as a way, you know, they can financially liberate themselves, invest in something that'll grow quicker than potentially the stock market or whatever.
I
So
think,
I feel like
yeah,
everybody feels that as well.
I think on that financial independence or getting out of the system side of things,
Yeah.
it's really interesting to me because like,
That's Sato.
well, yeah, but it's something we do. I think we work on that for communications and all your other internet activity. But that kind of financial thing is not new, right? The Central European Jewish families often put their money into rugs and jewelry and stuff like that, where you could move it when it didn't look like a good idea to stick around in
And
your
nobody
town
can
anymore.
dilute you, right?
Right. And so people had these ideas. The problem was that there were also the sort of things that someone could take away at the border. So they had, they were less effective for that. But I think people kind of scoff at crypto as offering that. But the people who are doing that haven't been in the position. They're the sort of people who put their wealth into a home and don't think that that's risky because they don't think about the idea that someone can come and take it from you. And that's the society and the space they live in, and that's not the world. I mean, there's plenty of people for whom, being able to hide your money digitally from anyone, any kind of thug or standover merchant or whatever, is a real service that banks even can't offer if they're not properly regulated and or they're not. You don't have the societal things around that to make using a bank safe, right? Aside from the fact that you're probably excluded anyway.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they're trying to do in Europe with, coming up with a cross-European payment system to rival MasterCard and Visa. And it's not because they care about like us having our own thing. It's because they want to know where the money comes from. They don't want you to use cash anymore because a cash is a transaction. A cash transaction is a transaction without intermediaries. And if you don't have the intermediary layer, you cannot read what people are doing. You cannot use AI to work your pre-crime system to understand, oh, did he buy this? Did he buy that? Right? So it's a question of, like Richard says, having control over your own life, your own destiny. And
Yeah.
something like Sato Talk, we use it, but we're like, oh, well, it doesn't have the AI summary. Wait till Google has to like snitch on you for the government or something,
Yeah.
and they'll give them all your transcripts of all your conversations that you've ever had. Then you
Yeah.
wished that Google Meets
Yeah.
didn't have
I mean,
AI transcript.
That always like I want to do try and find it and do like a third panel to the cartoon, because it was a cartoon of like 1950s or 60s America, and there's a guy like, oh, the government put a listening device in my filling. And then like the next one is like the early 2000s, and they're standing around in a lecture and they're like, I'm so glad we can pay a company to put a listening device in our living room. And like the third, like the new third panel is basically like, I'm so glad it's convenient to put a listening device in every meeting I attend, every call I make.
Yep.
And yeah, it's sort of
And
just
the
unthinkingly
funny
people doing
thing
that.
is, the funny thing to me is just like, again, everybody wants to like, this is what I feel like. I want to feel like I can be private and public when I want to be, you know? And I think a lot of people, when you start mentioning, listening devices or these things, they often think, oh, it's a conspiracy theory or this or that. It's not about that. It's about, I want to choose when I share stuff and don't. It's a choice thing. And I think everybody feels that way. It doesn't matter which country you're in. Because somehow even in the least surveyed countries, you often feel like, listen, you could easily be susceptible to something. And I feel like that's where it kind of comes in for me, and where I love cryptocurrency a lot is it's global. There's a global system. I hold my keys. And I have say. And again, what Alex said, if I want to move, and I do feel like all those things are coming back. I don't know if you guys get the clips, but I get often clips on Twitter of people talking about their Rolexes or how they trade up for Rolexes or the trading cards, the Pokemon stuff. All those things are coming back, and it seems more present right now than it has ever been. And I feel like it's just because, people feel like they have less and less control, over their money and over their privacy every single day,
Well, yeah, I mean, it really hit home for me one time when I was talking to a crypto treasury financial management financial services company for a work thing, and I was chatting to the staff, and they all seemed like they were based in Switzerland, but they all seemed to be like British ex-military. And I was talking to the guy, I said something, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, like no one here has any kids." And I was like, "What?" And they said it's basically a hiring requirement because if you have social media and if you have kids, you're a target. And they're like a deep vault custody service. So they hold, Ethereum Foundation, Ethereum type things. I don't know if they work for Ethereum, but they're kind of like a bank at that level. And so basically they have to be, because no one's got zero footprint these days. They can't be people with a family because someone might turn up and, like kidnap a family or whatever. But like, that's a really weird case, but I was just thinking about that's where privacy is just like, it's not just about, whatever. There's a whole bunch of reasons that, not just being out there or being able to control how you're out there, what aspects get shared and don't matter to people. And it's, it's sort of often seen as this, what do you have to hide? Well, these guys are just doing a job. Just
exactly
like doing their daily job, but their privacy is utterly important to them.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Sure enough, none of them on LinkedIn, none of them anywhere. And I was like, of course, thinking about it, they need that level of privacy, and it's a part of their, in their case, security. But it's not some like airy fairy thing that doesn't really matter. It matters to those guys a lot.
It matters, for sure.
I think we could talk on these topics endlessly, but our hour has passed way too fast as usual.
Yep.
Thank you everybody for showing up in the chat. We're like having 226 people watching us live right now. Thank you so much. Make sure you also check out the Open Internet Pod. You can find us on Spotify, Google, wherever, RCS, wherever you get your podcast from. And thank you so much, Boba, for showing up and sharing the ApeBond origin story. And again, Richard, thank you so much, and thank everybody for making both our bonds such a huge success.
See you, everyone.
Ciao.